We begin with what could be a dramatic escalation in the war in Ukraine. The National Security Council is saying Russia appears to have begun its long-anticipated new offensive in the east of the country, along front lines around Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kharkiv. The council believes Ukrainian forces can resist a fresh assault there. Now, authorities also say that a Russian missile attack has killed at least 7 civilians in the western city of Lviv. Russia maintains that it has struck hundreds of military targets in recent days. A warning now, the following report that you were going to see contains graphic images.
This is what Russian shelling does. Medics rush to help a wounded woman. Next to her, another person is clinging to life. Then, sirens and more explosions. The emergency workers rush for cover. They have no choice but to leave the victims exposed and bleeding out on the street. Sunday's shelling of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, killed at least 5 people and wounded another 13. Graphic scenes like this one have become commonplace around the country. As Russian forces bear down on eastern Ukraine, they're keeping up with attacks elsewhere in an apparent effort to weaken Ukraine's ability to defend itself. I call on all those who live under unending bombardment to leave. Our volunteers will help you do that. The Russian Defense Ministry said it struck more than 300 targets overnight across the country and downed Ukrainian fighter jets. On Monday, the governor of the Lviv region said strikes there killed and wounded several people, including civilians at non-military sites. This is an absolutely barbaric attack on an absolutely civilian target. People came to work in the morning. The western part of Ukraine has largely avoided Russia's wrath, but it's not been totally immune. Russian military planners have said nowhere in Ukraine is safe, something the country's civilian population knows painfully well.
And joining me now from Lviv is our correspondent, Emmanuelle Shaze. Emma, I understand, I was just talking to our producers, you had to seek shelter. Tell us what's going on where you are.
Hi, Brent. Good evening. Yes, I couldn't join you with a bunker tonight because we had to make our way to a bunker. There's a third airstrike alarm alert over Lviv right now, so that means that everybody has to seek shelter. So I'm here right now in a bunker in a basement with other people who are protecting themselves from a potential new airstrike. This is the third alert we've heard today.
And we know that the city of Lviv has been hit before. You were at the site of one of the blasts. I mean, Lviv has been considered to be relatively safe compared to what we're seeing in the east. Can we say that the security situation is now drastically changing?
It has changed. Lviv has been up until now relatively safe. It had been struck a few weeks ago. A military facility had been struck, but today's attack shows that really nowhere is really safe here in Ukraine. Today's attack's death toll is 7 people dead, 11 injured, including 3 seriously injured. And among the people injured was a 3-year-old child, Artem. This little boy escaped the war with his parents from Kharkiv, and they came here to Lviv to seek shelter, just like thousands of other people came from the eastern part of Ukraine. So you can only imagine how they must feel right now. They've already lost everything. They've already left everything behind, and now even in the west part of Ukraine, they are encountering the same, threats that they have been facing in the east. Although it has to be said that so far the western part of Ukraine has been spared the atrocities we've seen happening in the eastern part of the country.
DW's Emmanuelle Shaze tonight in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. Emma, thank you, and please stay safe. Well, meanwhile, a few thousand Ukrainian soldiers are standing their ground in a vast steel plant in the eastern port city of Mariupol. This is the last pocket of resistance against the Russians in the city. Authorities say that the defenders will fight to the end. Russia claims to control all of Mariupol's urban areas. Most of them are now in ruins. Well, I'm joined now by Aglaya Snetkov from University College London. She specializes in Russian foreign security and domestic policy. It's good to have you on the program. Let me ask you, how should we understand this new offensive by Russia? Are we talking about a last chance for Ukraine to save itself, or is this more a last chance for Russia to try and win this war?
So it depends whether you mean the offensive in terms of the Donbass, or whether it's about the increased shelling of large sections of Ukraine that we have seen over the last few days. There's definitely been escalations of shelling all over Ukraine, like in Lviv, around Kiev, but there's also the ongoing regrouping of the Russians in Donbass in preparation for the attack that is said to be imminent. The latest reports is that the Russians now have around 76 battalion groups stationed in the area, and therefore the expectation is that the attack will come shortly. Now, for the Russians, that is their last military chance. If they lose the battle for Donbass, they are effectively lost the war. And that is why the expectation is that the Russians will really try and focus on this military operation in order to try and to get as much out of it as they possibly can.
And we have to consider the fall of Mariupol to Russia. That seems all but certain. That would be a huge loss for Ukraine. What will this mean then for the defense and security calculus in Kyiv?
So I think in reality, we have been expecting the fall of Mariupol for a while now. It was a question of when and not a question of if. There's been claims and counterclaims about surrenders the whole of last week, about whether or not the Ukrainians were able to support their fighters in Mariupol. But in fact, over the next few days, Mariupol and the Azovstal will effectively fall. Hence the ultimatum.
I want to ask you too,
in terms of what it means.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No. In terms of what it means, so it will be seen as a victory for the Russian side. It's important symbolically. It's important because it is a major port in the Azov Sea for the Ukrainians, so it cuts off the Ukrainian control of the Azov. It will also be symbolically important from the point of view of the anti-Nazi crusade that President Putin has been going on. And it will also allow the Russians to reinforce their campaign in Donbass by moving the troops from Mariupol eastwards. From the point of view of Kyiv, because they've been expecting it, I don't think that the fall of Mariupol will come as any surprise. And therefore, tactically and strategically, they would have been planning for that. So that's not expected. They would have calculated it into their strategic planning.
And beyond the battlefield here, the EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen said in the past few days that it is just a matter of time now before Russia goes bankrupt. And I'm wondering, is Russia now running against the clock here and running against these economic sanctions while Ukraine finds itself rushing to keep itself armed so that it can continue fighting? Are those the two background battles that have emerged in this conflict?
So, to some extent, yes, but I think we have to keep in mind that at the moment what we have on the battlefield is essentially the Ukrainians having the manpower, particularly through mobilization, but needing more firepower. The Russian major problem is the lack of manpower. So even if we hear the stories of tank producers no longer being able to produce tanks, no difficulties in trying to create new equipment. Actually, in terms of equipment, the Russians have enough, but it's a question of whether they have sufficient manpower, soldiers to be able to fight it. In the long run, sanctions will, of course, have very negative fallbacks in terms of Russians' capacity to rebuild themselves militarily. But I think that, unfortunately, the effect may not be quick enough with regards to the actual battlefield and, let's say, the decisive battlefield in Donbass. the sanctions are not really going to be able to affect that in the short term. In the long run, absolutely, the Russian military will be much weakened by the sanctions that have been placed against them.
Yeah, that's a very good point, a point that I think, too, Vladimir Putin is finding harder and harder to ignore. Dr. Aglaya Tsenetkov from University College London, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, despite the renewed assault on Ukraine, Russia has suffered, as we just heard, a major loss. The Black Sea flagship, the Moskva, sank after allegedly being hit by Ukrainian missiles last week. Now, that is something that the Kremlin denies. Well, now images have emerged appearing to show the warship on fire and engulfed in smoke just moments before it sank. The missile cruiser was the biggest Russian warship lost in action since the Second World War.